Hello out there in TV land.
He best not hurt me. That milkman best not hurt your mama. Do y'all remember this insanely sad episode of Cold Case called The Letter? Let's get into it. So the episode starts off and we're in 1939. This is where we meet Sadie, Blanche, and Arletta. We find out that Sadie and Blanche live in a boarding house that's owned by Arletta's mother, Miss Marion. Sadie and Blanche are what I guess I'll describe as women of the night, if you know what I mean. Blanche says that her candy man pays her well, but she still needs to work tonight. The girls were supposed to be headed to a juke joint, but Sadie changed her mind. Once Sadie sends Arletta back to bed, Blanche turns to her and says, I bet she makes you think of your own little girl. This is when we find out that Sadie has a 10-year-old girl back in Virginia. She moved north on her own to try to earn some money so she could send for her daughter. The candy man, a dude named Man Ross, shows up for Blanche and she leaves with the other women, leaving Sadie alone at the table. When Sadie is alone at the table, she looks down at the locket of her daughter on her chest and she says that you would have been 10 years old today, so today is her daughter's birthday. Then tragically, we cut to Sadie's lifeless body. Turns out that Sadie was murdered. Now it's present day and this is where we meet Sarah, Sadie's granddaughter. She tells Lily and Scotty that her mother just passed away a few weeks ago and she went through her belongings and found the last letter that Sadie ever sent to her. She tells them that she really doesn't know much about her grandmother besides that she moved to the north in the 30s to try to find work. She says that her mother really didn't talk about her that much because she never forgave her for what she was. Sadie's daughter didn't like that she was a woman of the night. Sarah says that the police called Sadie a common two-bit hooker and that her mother called her a white man's whore. She said her mother didn't like knowing that that's where she came from. Sarah shows Lily the letter. In it, she points out that Sadie wrote, he best not hurt me. That milkman best not hurt your mother. So now they want to know who the milkman is, but Sarah says she has no idea because Sadie never wrote about him in any of her other letters. She tells Scotty and Lily that back then they chalked Sadie up to being murdered by one of her Johns, but she's like, no, I think my grandmother knew who did this to her. Lily and Scotty get on the case and they go find Sadie's file. From Sadie's file, they find out that she was SA and suffocated and that there was a ticket to New York in her belongings, but Sadie's daughter lived in Virginia, so why would she be trying to go to New York? The first suspect on their minds is the milkman, but they still don't know who that is. But they still have a lead because in Sadie's files, it states that Blanche was the last person to see her alive. They also know now that Sadie fought back because she was missing some fingernails, and back in 1939, that really didn't mean nothing because they didn't really have the tools that they have now for DNA, but that means something to them now. So now they want to exhumate Sadie's body. Lily and Scotty go to Sadie's granddaughter and ask her about the exhumation, and after talking to her for a little while, they convince her that it's the right thing to do. They also ask her, did Sadie mention a woman named Blanche in any of her letters? Sarah tells them yes. She goes through her little files and she hands them a picture of Sadie and Blanche. She says that Sadie once wrote about a fair they went to. So now we know what Blanche looks like, but we still have to find her. It was Will's and Nick's job to try to crack down on who the milkman could be. After going through some old files, they found out the name of the milk company that used to deliver to the boarding house back in 1939. But they only find information from the years 1930 through 1938 because in 1939 there was a fire, and after that the company didn't keep records anymore. But Will and Nick figured that with a fire that big there had to have been some news coverage, so they figured they can get a lead that way. Meanwhile, Lily and Scotty went to look through some arrest files because they figured that if Blanche was a woman of the night, she had to have been arrested for it at some point. They end up finding her file and find out that she was arrested in 1940, but a man named Man Ross Delaney was the one who paid her bail. Now, up until this point, I thought the Candy Man was just a nickname that Blanche had gave Man Ross, but no, he was actually a candy man. He had a whole candy franchise. So it was easy for Lily and Scotty to find Blanche at her residence because she's now married to the Candy Man, Man Ross. They asked Blanche was there a milkman that Sadie would have been afraid of, and she tells them about someone named Pierce. She says that he had burns all over his face and he had it out for Sadie over some milk. We travel back to 1939 where we see Blanche walking and then two white dudes in a milk truck show up. The one that we now know as Pierce because of the burns on his face says that he's not getting out of his truck for a colored whorehouse. He tells the other dude like, hey, let them get their own milk. This is when Sadie comes out the house and the man that's with Pierce looks at her and says that she almost looks white. Back in this time, Sadie is considered white passing. Pierce name drops the man that's with him and calls him Jonesy, and he tells him to get out the truck and dump the milk, and Jonesy does. They expect Sadie and Blanche to get it up, but Sadie is like, no, Blanche, don't touch it, leave it there. Then we come back to the present day where Blanche tells Lily and Scotty that if Sadie had any more problems out of Pierce after that, she didn't tell her about it. And she says, plus, I stayed clear of him in that milk truck after that. Then Lily tells Blanche that, well, Sadie wrote in a letter that she was scared of him because now they're assuming that Pierce is the milkman. But this is when Blanche tells them, like, no, Sadie couldn't have wrote those letters because she couldn't read or write. Neither of the women in the boarding house could. So now we gotta find out who was writing the letters for Sadie. The gang meets back up, and this is when we find out more about Pierce. He was burned in a fire that was started by white men after they found out that the milk company was hiring black people. Including Pierce, there were 5 more people who were injured in that fire. Back then, they printed victims' names and addresses in a newspaper, so now we just gotta hope that Pierce still at the same address. Scotty goes to a handwriting specialist to try to find out if he can figure out who was writing those letters for Sadie. Will and Nick go to Pierce's old address and find out that he died 10 years ago and that his house was inherited by his granddaughter. His granddaughter says that her grandfather was a good man and she can't see how he would have anything to do with this. She also reveals that her granddaddy kept a diary. The gang gets back together to discuss Pierce's diary, and in it he was talking about something called the 5th day. The 5th day was apparently a group that Pierce started that consists of all the men who were injured in the fire. And in the diary, Pierce also wrote about the aftermath of what happened after Sadie left those bottles just laying there. We go back to 1939 and the boys are hot that Sadie didn't pick up those bottles. Jonesy turns to Pierce and he tells him that the 5th day ought to teach Sadie a lesson. Then he aggressively grabs some more milk bottles. Then he starts walking up on Sadie. He gets all up in Sadie's face and he's like, here's your milk. But this time he doesn't break the bottles. He drops them, but they just fall gently. From what's in Pierce's diary, that got the gang thinking that, hey, maybe Pierce isn't the evil milkman. Maybe it's Jonesy. And Jonesy says something about the 5th day, but there's no mention of him being injured in that fire. And because Jonesy said that the 5th day ought to teach Sadie a lesson, now they're thinking, okay, the 5th day must have been a group that went around teaching black people a lesson. So they do some more digging and they find out that they were right. The African American Museum had a list of hate groups in 1939 and the 5th day was on it. The museum had a picture of them and Jonesy was indeed a part of it, but the only thing is that the museum only had their last names, so we still gotta figure out how we gonna locate Jonesy. Then John comes in and he tells Scotty that the handwriting specialist said that it had to have been a female kid who was writing those letters for Sadie. The only kid that was in the boarding house during that time was Arletta. They end up easily locating Arletta and they take her back to the boarding house, which is now a bed and breakfast and is owned by some other people, but they let Lily and Scotty bring her so she can see her mother's old place. Arletta tells them that even though she was the one writing Sadie's letters, the words were all Sadie's. Then they ask her about the milkman, who she instantly remembers as Jonesy. She says that she remembers him well because of what Sadie found in the milk. We travel back to 1939, the day that Sadie and Jonesy had that standoff. When Sadie took the milk in the house, underneath the bottles was a note from Jonesy that said, "Forgive me." At first, Sadie tells Arletta to just throw the note away, but then something changes her mind and she tells Arletta to write him back for her. Her note back to him says, "Why should I?" And he says, "Because you're a lady." And she says, "I forgive you then this just leads them into having a whole little love affair, child." As you can see, Sadie and Jonesy really started feeling each other. We come back to the present day and Arletta tells them that those notes went on for months and months, right up until Sadie was murdered. Lily ends up asking Arletta, like, if Jonesy and Sadie had a secret love affair, why did she think he was gonna hurt her? And Arletta says, no, I think that she was afraid he was gonna hurt her hard. They asked Arletta, did Sadie and Jonesy exchange notes on the night that she was murdered? And she says yes. She says that Jonesy wanted to meet Sadie at the boarding house for a proper visit. Arletta also tells them that Sadie used to keep all of the notes behind the oven, and she tells them that she took the notes when nobody was looking and she still got them to this day. With the notes, they find out more about Jonesy. They find out that he was an orphan who was raised by other people. And in his notes, he told Sadie that he would care for her little girl like his own because she's like him. and he says that all kids need love. Jonesy was saying that he wanted to marry Sadie and take care of her child, so this doesn't sound like somebody who would be running around with those fifth day dudes. Now the gang is like, was Sadie murdered by the man who hated her, Pierce, or the man who loved her, Jonesy? And they're also thinking that something could have happened that night at the boarding house to change how Jonesy felt about Sadie. Then we are hit with a major twist. In one of Jonesy's notes to Sadie, he wrote, "Do you love me or do you love the Candyman?" Man, Ross, what you gotta do with this? So Lily and Scotty go back to Man, Ross, and Blanche's place, where he reveals that even though him and Blanche had just started dating at the time, he had a little crush on Sadie. Man, Ross says that he was young, dumb, and foolish, and he thought he could have his cake and eat it too. But he said that Sadie never went for it because she was involved with Jonesy. So now Lily and Scott are like, oh, you knew about that affair? But Man Ross says that he didn't know about the affair to the night that Sadie was murdered because she was supposed to go to the juke joint with them, but she didn't show up and he was looking for her. We go back to 1939 and we see Man Ross going to the boarding house to get Sadie. But for some reason, you can overhear Jonesy and Sadie talking, and Jonesy is saying something about they need to leave tonight. Man Ross overhears Jonesy telling Sadie that something came up, they just gotta go tonight, he got the tickets, and Sadie is like, she wants to go, but she just doesn't understand why it has to be right now and tonight. Then Man Ross ends up making a noise, then he gets on down before he gets caught. We come back to the present day, and Man Ross says that he went back to the juke joint and he never saw Sadie again. He also says that Sadie was asking for it for messing with that half-blind white man. This is when we find out that Jonesy was blind in one eye due to the fire, so he was injured in that fire. Man Ross says that he didn't tell anybody what he saw that night because he didn't want to hurt the woman he loved, Blanche. Some of the gang gets back together and they're discussing what they have so far. Lily says that Man Ross offered his DNA and basically the clothes off his back, but that still doesn't exclude him. Scotty still think he could have done it out of jealousy. And they're also like, if Jonesy just wanted to meet Sadie that night for a proper visit, what made him so frantic to leave? Then Nick and Will show up and reveal that they now know Jonesy's real name, Nathan Jones. At this point, they only have his name though, and they ran it and they came up with some military records. Lily is like, Jonesy was blind in one eye. If he tried out for the military, he would have been turned down. This is when Nick says that his father went through something like that. He says that it would have been a class 4F rejection, unacceptable for military duty. So now if they check Nathan Jones for 4F records, then maybe we'll finally be able to track down Jonesy. Then this dude shows up and tells Lily that the judge rejected the motion to exhumate Sadie's body. He says that the judge says there wasn't enough probable cause and that the state just really ain't got the money for it. Lily then goes to Sadie's granddaughter and gives her the notes that Sadie was passing with Jonesy and tells her that she wasn't afraid of the milkman, she was in love with him. She then tells Sarah that the state does not want to exhumate Sadie's body. Sarah says that she wished her mom could have learned all this about Sadie, and she says that since they've been working on this case, this is the closest she's ever felt to Sadie, and she says that she now feels like she knows how her grandmother lived, but now she wants to know how she died, so she'll pay for it out of her own pocket. So they end up exhumating Sadie's body. Sadie's body is 65 years old, but the doctor says that DNA can last for hundreds of years. They let him know that Sadie might have something underneath her fingernails. Then Scotty gets a call and he finds out that they found Jonesy and he's still alive and kicking in New York. Then the doctor picks up one of Sadie's fingernails and says that he might have something. Just a little time goes by, and while Scotty and Lily are on the way to meet Jonesy, Lily gets a call and it clears the Candyman, Man Ross. The doctor says that the DNA under Sadie's fingernails does not match him. We finally get to Jonesy and he is living with his grandson. They ask Jonesy about Sadie and he says that he remembers how she died, and Lily is like, yeah, her John did it, right? But Jonesy is like, no, Sadie wasn't a woman of the night, she was a lady. He says that Sadie was only living in that boarding house because she had to, and he said that from time to time he would help Sadie with money, but of course they couldn't reveal that to the world. He goes on and says that Sadie's daughter ought to know that Sadie was a lady, but they like, Sadie's daughter died, and they like, okay, let's let's get to the point. Why were you trying to get Sadie to leave on the night that she was murdered? Jonesy says because they were coming. We go back to 1939 once again, and Jonesy and Pierce and the other Fifth Day members are sitting around drinking and talking about Sadie. Pierce is cracking racist jokes, but Jonesy visibly doesn't find any of it funny, and Pierce notices this. Then Pierce says that it's time that Sadie gets a taste of a real white man's milk. Then he's like, ain't that right, Jonesy? And Jonesy is like, yeah. Then they toast and say that they going to get Sadie tonight. And that's when Jonesy rushed to the boarding house, and that's why he was there that night trying to get her to leave. He says he begged and he pleaded, but she just wouldn't go. And he said he just left after that. Scotty is like, a man loves a woman and he just leaves her to that? Jonesy's annoying ass grandson is all in the back like this happened forever ago. Why do y'all care now? And Lily is like, because a lady lost her life and her family wants to know why. Lily gives Jonesy the notes that him and Sadie was passing while his grandson is still in the back saying that his granddaddy didn't do nothing. And Lily's like, okay, so he wouldn't mind submitting some DNA. Look at Jonesy's face. Lily and Scotty started talking. They're telling Jonesy that there's a lab right here in New York that it'll only take a couple minutes. They tell him that they just want to compare it to what was found underneath Sadie's fingernails. Jonesy looks visibly sick, so Lily's like, well, we could just skip the trip and you can tell us what really happened. Then, looking real defeated, Jonesy says that he's ready. And this is when we find out what really happened to Sadie. We go back to 1939 for the last time, and like we already knew, Jonesy was trying to get Sadie to leave with him to go to New York. But Sadie is like, New York, my daughter is in Virginia, and she's telling Jonesy like, you made these promises, you said that we'd be a family. Then Sadie shows Jonesy the picture of her daughter in her locket, and this is the first time he's ever seen her, and this man starts tripping. This is when he's like, Sadie, this is the first time you showed me her. I thought she was white passing like you and me. We can make it. You can pass. We can go out into the world and no one will know what you really are. He tells Sadie that she barely looks black and that he just wants her. And at this point, he basically wants her to disown her daughter. Sadie is not going for it. Jonesy tells Sadie that he loves her and she's like, no, you don't. You just told me. Then this is when the other members of the Fifth Day show up. And I don't want to go into too many details about what happened, so I'm going to try to make it short. So basically they grab Sadie and they put her on the table while holding her down. Pierce aids her while she's screaming for help from Jonesy, and Jonesy is just sitting there crying and watching the whole ordeal go down. Then he goes over to Sadie and he puts his hands over her mouth. I guess he didn't want to hear her screaming no more, or he wanted to, I don't know, make it easier for her, but he ends up having his hands over her mouth and nose until she loses her life. She scratched his hand while in the process, so of course it was gonna be Jonesy's DNA under her nails. One thing I love about cold cases is that it don't matter how old a person is, they will still drag their ass off to jail, so they arrest Jonesy and take him where he needs to be. Then Lily gives the notes back to Sarah, where Sarah meets Arletta for the first time, and Arletta tells her that Sadie was a lady. So now she can talk to Arletta about her grandmother, and even if Sadie's daughter didn't know how much she was loved by her mother, then at least now Sarah will know. Then we cut over to Blanche and Man Ross, and it looks like they made up. Now that the case is closed, of course, the episode has to end with Lily looking over and seeing Sadie fade away in the distance, making me want to cry and bang my head up against the wall.